The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed overhead as Sophie pushed through the heavy glass doors. Her shoulders ached from the weight of her sleeping baby girl, little Lily, strapped against her chest in a worn fabric carrier. The baby's tiny face was peaceful, her small fists curled up near her chin, completely unaware of the stress that had become her mother's constant companion. Sophie grabbed a red shopping basket from the stack near the entrance. She didn't need a cart. She couldn't afford enough groceries to fill a cart anyway. The basket would do just fine for the essentials she desperately needed to get through the next few days. Walking through the aisles felt like navigating a maze of things she wanted but couldn't have. Fresh fruits that looked perfect and colorful, packaged meals that would make dinner so much easier, cookies that she used to buy without thinking twice. Now everything was a calculation. Every single item had to justify its place in her basket. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Sophie carefully pulled it out, trying not to wake Lily. It was a text from her landlord, another reminder about the rent that was already 5 days late. She quickly shoved the phone back into her jeans pocket and took a deep breath. One problem at a time. Right now she needed to focus on getting food and supplies for her baby. Sophie headed straight for the baby section. Formula was getting expensive, more expensive every time she came to the store. She picked up the cheapest brand, the one that came in the plain white container with basic blue lettering. It wasn't the fancy organic stuff with the smiling babies on the label, but it would keep Lily fed and healthy. That's all that mattered. Next came diapers. She stood in front of the endless rows of packages, doing quick math in her head. The big box would last longer and save money in the long run, but she didn't have enough cash for the big box. The small package would have to do, even though the price per diaper was higher. Sometimes being poor meant spending more in the long run because you couldn't afford the bulk discount. It was one of those cruel ironies that kept people trapped. With the formula and diapers in her basket, Sophie made her way through the rest of the store. A loaf of bread, the cheap white kind that was always on the bottom shelf, a jar of peanut butter for protein, a bag of rice because it was filling and would stretch across multiple meals, a dozen eggs, some instant noodles, a small bag of apples because Lily would be starting solid food soon, and she wanted her daughter to have something healthy. Every item went into the basket only after Sophie picked it up, checked the price, and did mental calculations. She'd been living like this for months now, ever since Lily's father walked out 3 weeks before the baby was born. He'd said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he was too young for this kind of responsibility. He was 26, the same age as Sophie, but somehow she'd found the strength to step up while he'd chosen to run away. Her parents were gone, lost in a car accident when she was 21. She had no siblings, no close relatives who could help. Her friends from college had slowly drifted away when her life became about bottles and diapers instead of happy hours and weekend trips. Being a young single mother was isolating in ways she'd never expected. Sophie had been working at a diner downtown, pulling double shifts whenever she could. The tips weren't great, but they paid the bills. Barely. Then last week, her car broke down on the way to work. The mechanic said it needed a new transmission. $1,200. She'd laughed bitterly when he told her. $1,200 might as well have been $12 million. Without a car, getting to work became nearly impossible. The buses didn't run early enough for the breakfast shift, which was her best money-making time. She'd called in sick twice already this week, and her manager was losing patience. She could hear it in his voice, that edge that meant her job was hanging by a thread. Standing in the checkout line now, Sophie felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She'd counted her money 3 times before leaving her apartment. $52 in cash. That's all she had until her next paycheck, which was still 4 days away. 4 days might as well be forever when you had a baby to feed. The line moved slowly. A woman in front of her was arguing with the cashier about a coupon that wouldn't scan. Behind her, Sophie could feel other customers getting impatient, their energy pressing against her back. Lily stirred in the carrier, making small sounds that meant she'd wake up soon. Once she woke up, she'd be hungry. And if she was hungry, she'd cry. And if she cried here in the store, people would stare and judge. Sophie gently bounced on her feet, that automatic mother movement that sometimes kept babies calm. Please just stay asleep a little longer, she thought. Just let me get through this checkout line without a scene. Finally, the coupon dispute resolved and the line moved forward. One person ahead of her now. Then it was her turn. Sophie carefully lifted her basket onto the counter, and the young cashier, a girl who couldn't be more than 19, started scanning items with mechanical efficiency. Beep, the formula. Beep, the diapers. Beep, the bread, peanut butter, rice, eggs, noodles, apples. Each beep felt like a small hammer tap against Sophie's composure. She watched the numbers on the register screen climb higher and higher. $42, $50, $58, $63. The cashier pressed a button and looked up at Sophie with a practiced smile. That'll be $67.43. The words hit Sophie like cold water. $67. She only had 52. Her hands shook as she pulled out her wallet, unfolding the bills she already knew wouldn't be enough. She said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to put some things back. The cashier's smile faded slightly, replaced by a neutral expression that was somehow worse than outright annoyance. Okay, which items? Sophie stared at the groceries now sitting on the counter. Which ones could she live without? The bread? She needed that. The peanut butter? Protein was important. The rice? That was her meal plan for the week. The apples? Lily needed nutrition. Her eyes landed on the diapers. The diapers, she said, her throat tight. She still had maybe 4 or 5 diapers left at home. She could wash and reuse them if she had to. People used to use cloth diapers all the time, right? The cashier removed the diapers and the total dropped. $59.27. Still too much. The apples too, Sophie whispered, feeling her face burn with shame. Behind her, she heard someone sigh heavily. That impatient sound that meant she was inconveniencing people, taking up their valuable time with her poverty. The cashier removed the apples. $54.13. Sophie looked at her cash. $52. She was still $2 short. $2. The same amount she used to spend on a fancy coffee without thinking twice. Now it was the difference between eating and going hungry. And the peanut butter, she said, her voice breaking. Please. By now Lily had woken up and was starting to fuss. Her small cries were getting louder, filling the space around them. Sophie tried to soothe her, patting her back through the carrier, but the baby was having none of it. She wanted to eat, and she wanted to eat now. $46.78, the cashier announced, her tone completely flat now. Sophie handed over her money, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped the bills. The cashier counted it, put it in the register, and handed back her change. $5.22. That was all she had left in the world until Monday. Behind her, an elderly woman in an expensive-looking coat spoke to her companion, but her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people shouldn't have children if they can't afford to take care of them properly. The words hit Sophie like a slap. Her vision blurred with tears. She wanted to turn around and scream at the woman, to tell her about the car accident that killed her parents, about the boyfriend who abandoned her, about the car that broke down through no fault of her own, about how hard she was trying, how every single day was a battle just to survive, just to keep her baby fed and safe. But she didn't say any of that. She just stood there frozen while the cashier bagged her reduced pile of groceries. Bread, formula, eggs, rice, noodles, the basics of survival, nothing more. As Sophie reached for her bags, a security guard approached. He was a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a name tag that read Dennis. His expression was stern. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. You're holding up the line. Sophie nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. She grabbed her bags and moved away from the checkout, her legs feeling weak and shaky. Lily was crying harder now, her face scrunched up and red. The sound echoed through the store entrance, and Sophie could feel everyone's eyes on her, judging her, pitying her, thinking exactly what that old woman had said out loud. She made her way to a bench near the entrance and sat down heavily. Setting the bags at her feet, she lifted Lily out of the carrier and held her close, rocking her and making soothing sounds. But Sophie was crying too now, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto Lily's fuzzy little head. This was supposed to be different. Her life was supposed to be different. She'd had plans once. She'd been studying to be a nurse, taking classes at night while working during the day. She'd been good at it too, making high grades, excited about a future where she could help people and make decent money doing it. Then her parents died, and she'd had to drop out to deal with everything. Then she got pregnant and whatever remained of her old plans crumbled completely. Now here she was, 26 years old, sitting on a bench in a grocery store, crying while her baby cried with $5 to her name and no idea how she was going to make it to Monday. Sophie fumbled for her phone, thinking maybe she could call her friend Rachel. Rachel had helped her out a few times before, lending her $20 or $40 here and there. But when she pressed the button, nothing happened. Dead battery, of course. She'd forgotten to charge it last night because the charging cable was broken, and she had to hold it at a specific angle. And she'd been so tired she'd just fallen asleep. So there she sat, completely alone, completely stuck. With no one to call and nowhere to go. The bus wouldn't come for another 45 minutes. She couldn't walk home carrying a baby and groceries. It was 3 miles and it was getting dark. Lily finally started to settle down, her cries fading to small hiccups and whimpers. Sophie wiped her own tears with the back of her hand and tried to pull herself together. This was just a bad moment. She'd had bad moments before and survived them. She'd get through this too somehow. But sitting there on that bench watching other people walk by with their full carts and their comfortable lives, Sophie felt more defeated than she'd ever felt in her life. She felt invisible and worthless and completely, utterly alone. Sophie sat on the bench for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. Lily had finally quieted down, making those little sucking motions with her mouth that babies do when they're settling. Sophie held her close, breathing in that sweet baby smell that somehow made everything both better and worse at the same time. Better because this little person was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Worse because the weight of responsibility felt crushing. Through the glass doors, she could see inside the store. People were still shopping, still going about their normal Friday evening routines. Picking up dinner ingredients. Grabbing a bottle of wine for the weekend. Buying flowers just because they looked pretty. Simple pleasures that felt like luxuries from another lifetime. The elderly woman who'd made that cruel comment walked past Sophie on her way out. She had 3 full bags of groceries and her companion was carrying 2 more. The woman glanced at Sophie and for just a second their eyes met. Sophie expected to see more judgment, more of that harsh disapproval, but instead the woman's expression shifted slightly. Was that guilt, pity? The woman looked away quickly and kept walking, her heels clicking against the pavement as she headed toward a shiny silver sedan in the parking lot. Sophie wanted to feel angry at her, wanted to hold on to that rage as fuel. But she was too tired to be angry, too defeated. She just felt hollow. She was trying to figure out her next move when she heard footsteps approaching. Heavy footsteps, the kind that suggested someone tall and purposeful. Sophie looked up, expecting maybe another security guard coming to tell her she couldn't sit here, that she needed to leave the property. Instead, she saw a man she hadn't noticed before. He was probably in his early 40s, wearing dark slacks and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No tie, but something about the way he carried himself suggested he was used to wearing one. His hair had touches of gray at the temples, and his face had that kind of weathered quality that came from years of responsibility and stress. He was holding a shopping basket with just a few items in it. A package of pasta, some sauce, a bag of salad. Bachelor dinner, Sophie thought randomly. The kind of meal her dad used to make when her mom was working late shifts at the hospital. The man stopped a few feet away from the bench, seeming to hesitate. Then he cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected. Warm somehow, not threatening. Sophie instinctively held Lily closer, that protective mother instinct kicking in even though logically she knew she was in a public place and probably safe. "Yes?" she managed to say, her voice still rough from crying. The man shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "I was in line behind you," he said. "I saw what happened at the checkout." Of course he did. Everyone saw. Everyone witnessed her humiliation. Sophie felt her face flush hot again, and she looked down at Lily, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry I held up the line," she mumbled. No, the man said quickly. I'm not here to complain." He paused, and when Sophie finally glanced up at him, she saw that he looked genuinely troubled, like he was wrestling with something internal. "I was wondering if I could help. If you'd let me go back and get those things you had to put back." Sophie's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned early in life that nothing came free, that every kindness had a price attached. "I can't accept that," she said firmly, even though part of her was screaming to say yes, to take whatever help was offered. The man nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. He set his basket down on the ground and moved a little closer, but not threateningly so. He sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving plenty of space between them. "May I sit for a moment?" Sophie shrugged. It was a public bench. She couldn't exactly tell him no. For a minute, neither of them spoke. Inside the store, Sophie could hear the muffled sounds of scanning beeps and the murmur of conversations. A car pulled up outside and a family piled out, kids laughing about something. "My name is David," the man said finally. "David Chen. I run a tech company downtown. Mitchell Technologies, maybe you've heard of it?" Sophie shook her head. She didn't follow tech news. She barely had time to follow any news. Her world had shrunk to the size of her tiny apartment, and her shifts at the diner. David smiled slightly. "That's probably for the best. We're not that interesting anyway. Lots of software development, cloud services, boring corporate stuff." He paused. "The reason I'm telling you this is because I want you to understand that I'm not some random person with questionable motives. I'm just someone who was standing in line watching a young mother struggle, and I couldn't walk away without at least trying to help." "Why?" Sophie asked bluntly. "Why would you want to help a complete stranger?" David was quiet for a moment, staring out at the parking lot. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Because someone helped my mother once," he said finally. "A long time ago when I was about your daughter's age." He turned to look at Sophie, and she saw something in his eyes that made her believe he understood. "Really understood. My father left when I was 6 months old," David continued. "Just walked out one day and never came back. My mom was 25, working 2 jobs, barely keeping us fed. One night she was at a grocery store, a lot like this actually, and she couldn't afford everything she needed. A woman behind her in line paid for her groceries. Just like that. Refused to take no for an answer." Sophie felt tears prickling at her eyes again. "What happened?" "My mom cried for an hour straight," David said with a soft laugh. But that act of kindness, that one moment of someone seeing her and helping her, it gave her hope. It reminded her that there were still good people in the world, that she wasn't completely alone. He paused. "She used to tell me that story all the time when I was growing up. Said it changed something in her, made her determined to pass that kindness forward whenever she could." "Where is she now?" Sophie asked quietly. "She passed away 5 years ago," David said, and there was real sadness in his voice. "Cancer. But she lived a good life. Went back to school, became a teacher, helped hundreds of kids over the years. She never forgot that woman in the grocery store, though. Never knew her name. Never saw her again, but she never forgot." They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Lily stirred in Sophie's arms, making those sweet little cooing sounds that made Sophie's heart melt every single time. "Your daughter is beautiful," David said. "What's her name?" "Lily," Sophie replied, and saying her name out loud made her feel a little stronger somehow. "She's 8 months old." 8 months, David repeated. "That's a good age. Starting to really interact with the world. Probably trying to crawl?" Sophie nodded. "She gets up on her hands and knees and rocks back and forth. Haven't quite figured out the forward motion yet." David chuckled. "She will soon enough. And then you'll be chasing her everywhere, wishing for the days when she stayed in one place." Despite everything, Sophie felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "That's what everyone tells me." They fell into a more comfortable silence. Sophie realized that for the first time in months, she was having a normal conversation with another adult. Not about bills or schedules or whether she could pick up an extra shift. Just talking, being human. "So," David said after a while, his tone gentle but serious, "I'd really like to help. Not as charity and not because I pity you, but because I know what it's like to struggle, even if it was secondhand through my mother's experiences. And because I believe that when we have the ability to help someone, we should." Sophie looked down at Lily, then at her sad little pile of groceries sitting in bags at her feet. Bread, formula, eggs, rice, noodles, the bare minimum. She thought about the diapers she'd had to put back, the apples that Lily would have enjoyed, the peanut butter that would have given her protein for the week. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." David's face broke into a genuine smile. "You don't need to thank me, but you're welcome." He stood up, grabbing his basket. "I'll be right back. Is there anything else you need while I'm in there?" Sophie shook her head quickly. No, just the things I put back. That's already too much. All right, David said. But as he started walking toward the store entrance, he paused and turned back. Actually, you know what? Humor me. I'm going to grab a few extra things. Some fruit, maybe some vegetables, protein. Nothing crazy, just some staples. You can consider it payment for sitting here and listening to an old man tell stories about his mother. Before Sophie could protest, he was already walking through the doors. She watched him disappear into the store, part of her still not quite believing this was happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, not to people like her. But as she sat there holding Lily, feeling the cool evening air on her face and watching other shoppers come and go, Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Just a tiny flicker of it, fragile as a candle flame, but there nonetheless. Inside the store, David moved through the aisles with purpose. He grabbed the diapers and apples that Sophie had put back. Then he added more: a package of chicken breasts, fresh broccoli, bananas, a box of oatmeal, orange juice, a block of cheese, whole wheat bread. He wasn't going overboard, wasn't trying to make her feel like a charity case. Just solid, practical food that would help her get through more than a few days. At the baby section, he paused. He grabbed an extra container of formula, the good kind this time, the one with the happy babies on the label. Then he saw a small stuffed elephant on the shelf, soft and gray with floppy ears. His daughter had loved elephants when she was a baby. That was 20 years ago now. She was in college on the other coast, living her own life. He missed those baby days sometimes, even the difficult parts. He grabbed the elephant and added it to his basket. At the checkout, the same young cashier who'd served Sophie looked at David's basket full of baby items and groceries with barely concealed curiosity. David just smiled politely and paid without comment. The total came to over $200. He didn't even blink. When he walked back out to the bench, Sophie's eyes went wide at the number of bags he was carrying. That's too much, she started to say, but David just shook his head. It's done, he said simply. He set the bags down next to her other ones, then pulled out the stuffed elephant, looking almost sheepish. I know this is silly, but I saw this and thought maybe Lily might like it. Sophie took the elephant, her hand shaking slightly. It was so soft. Lily immediately reached for it, her little fingers grasping at the floppy ears. This is incredibly kind, Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, David replied. He checked his watch. What time does your bus come? Not for another half hour, Sophie admitted. David frowned slightly. That's a long wait with a baby and all these groceries. Where do you live? Sophie hesitated. She wasn't about to tell a stranger her address, kind as he seemed. David seemed to understand her hesitation. I'm not asking for your address. I'm just wondering if you're heading in the direction of downtown, because if so, I'd be happy to give you a ride. Save you the bus trip. Every warning bell Sophie had ever learned told her not to get in a car with a stranger. But looking at David's face, at his kind eyes and genuine expression, she found herself wanting to trust him. Maybe that made her naive. Maybe she'd regret it. But right now, in this moment, she needed to believe that good people still existed. Sophie looked at David, then down at Lily, who was happily clutching the stuffed elephant, then at all the bags of groceries surrounding her feet. The logical part of her brain was screaming warnings. Stranger danger, all those news stories about people who seemed nice until they weren't. But the exhausted, overwhelmed part of her brain was saying something different. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Sometimes you have to trust. I live over on Maple Street, she said carefully, not giving the specific address. Near the old library, David nodded. I know the area. That's actually on my way home. I live about 10 minutes past there. He gestured toward the parking lot. My car is right over there. The blue sedan. You can see it from here if that makes you feel more comfortable. Sophie appreciated that he understood her hesitation, that he wasn't pushing or making her feel silly for being cautious. Okay, she said finally. A ride would be really helpful. Thank you. David smiled and began gathering up the grocery bags. Sophie started to help, but he waved her off. You've got your hands full with the little one. I've got these. He managed to loop all the bags onto his arms in one go, though Sophie could see it was awkward and heavy. Lead the way when you're ready. Sophie stood up, adjusting Lily in the carrier and making sure the baby was secure. Lily was still fascinated by the elephant, making little happy sounds as she squeezed its soft ears. It was the happiest Sophie had seen her all day. and that simple fact made her want to cry all over again. They walked across the parking lot together, Sophie keeping a slight distance but staying close enough for conversation. The evening air was cool now, and she was glad she'd put Lily in the long-sleeved onesie that morning. David led them to a dark blue sedan that looked new but not flashy. Clean but lived in. There was a coffee cup in the holder and some papers on the passenger seat. "Sorry about the mess," David said, quickly gathering the papers with one hand while balancing the groceries. "Work stuff. It tends to follow me everywhere." He hit a button on his key fob and the trunk popped open. He loaded the grocery bags carefully, making sure the eggs and bread were on top where they wouldn't get crushed. Sophie noticed a child's car seat in the back, though it looked old and dusty. David caught her looking and gave a sad smile. "My daughter's old seat. She's 20 now, off at college across the country. I keep meaning to take it out, but..." He trailed off with a shrug that said more than words could. Something about that detail, that small piece of vulnerability, made Sophie relax a little more. This was a father who missed his kid, a man who understood what it meant to care for a child. David opened the back door for her, and Sophie carefully climbed in with Lily. She considered sitting in the front but decided the back felt safer, gave her more control somehow. If she needed to, she could open the door and get out at a red light. Not that she thought she'd need to, but having the option comforted her. David didn't comment on her choice. He just got into the driver's seat, adjusted his mirrors and pulled out of the parking spot carefully. "Maple Street near the old library," he confirmed. "The brick building with the green awning." "That's the one," Sophie said, surprised he knew it that specifically. "I used to take my daughter there when she was little," David said, as he turned onto the main road. They had this great children's section with those little reading nooks. She'd spend hours in there pulling books off the shelves. Drove the librarians crazy, but they were always patient with her. Sophie smiled despite herself. "I haven't been able to take Lily there yet. I keep meaning to, but there's never time." "Time is the hardest thing when you're a parent," David agreed, "especially when you're doing it alone. My mom used to say she felt like she was always running but never actually getting anywhere." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Sophie watched the familiar streets pass by through the window. The pizza place where she used to go with friends from school. The park where she'd walked during her pregnancy, trying to stay active. The corner store that charged too much but was open late when she needed diapers in an emergency. "Can I ask you something?" David said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "And please feel free to tell me it's none of my business." Sophie tensed slightly. "Okay. Are you working right now? I noticed you mentioned something about a paycheck at the store." Sophie hesitated. She wasn't sure why she felt comfortable telling him, but the words came out anyway. "I work at Betty's Diner downtown, or I did. I'm not sure if I still have a job, honestly." She explained about the car breaking down, about missing shifts, about her manager's increasingly frustrated tone. David listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, seeming to think carefully about his words. "What were you doing before the diner?" "I was in school," Sophie said, and she heard the wistfulness in her own voice. "Studying to be a nurse. I'd finished 2 years of the program when my parents died. Had to drop out to deal with everything, and then I got pregnant and..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "A nurse," David repeated. "That's a noble profession. My mom always said nurses were the real heroes of hospitals. Doctors get the glory, but nurses do the actual work." Sophie laughed softly. "That's what my instructors used to say. I really loved it. Loved feeling like I was learning something important, like I was going to make a difference." She looked down at Lily. "But life had other plans, I guess." "Life tends to do that," David agreed. He slowed at a red light, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel thoughtfully. "You know, my company has programs for situations like yours. We believe in hiring people with potential, not just people with perfect resumes." Sophie felt her heart skip a beat. "What kind of programs?" "Apprenticeships, mostly. We bring people in, train them for various positions, administrative work, customer service, IT support. Even some entry-level software development for people with the right aptitude. The pay is decent, better than minimum wage. Full benefits, including health insurance and childcare assistance." Childcare assistance. Those two words hit Sophie like a lightning bolt. The lack of affordable childcare was one of the biggest obstacles she faced. She couldn't work enough hours because she couldn't afford to pay someone to watch Lily. But she couldn't afford childcare because she didn't work enough hours. It was a vicious cycle with no apparent exit. That sounds too good to be true, Sophie said carefully. David shrugged. It's not charity if that's what you're worried about. It's actually good business. We've found that people who get opportunities like this tend to be incredibly loyal and hardworking. The return on investment is substantial. Plus, it's the right thing to do. He paused. The company my mother worked for when I was a kid had a program like this. It's how she was able to go back to school while still working full-time. I built something similar into my company from the beginning. The light turned green and David continued driving. They were getting close to Sophie's neighborhood now. She could see the old library building in the distance, its brick facade lit by streetlights. I don't have a resume, Sophie said quietly. I don't have references. I don't have anything really, except a partially completed nursing degree from 4 years ago. But you have determination, David said firmly. You have intelligence. You have the ability to prioritize and make difficult decisions under pressure. I saw all of that tonight in the grocery store. You were doing math in your head, making impossible choices, trying to figure out how to make $5 stretch until Monday. Those are valuable skills. He pulled onto Maple Street and slowed down. Which building? Sophie pointed to a 3-story apartment building that had seen better days. The paint was peeling in places and one of the porch lights was burned out. She felt embarrassed for him to see where she lived, but she pushed that feeling down. She had nothing to be ashamed of. She was doing the best she could with what she had. David pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. He turned in his seat to look at her properly. I'm going to give you my business card. I want you to think about what I said about the apprenticeship program. If you're interested, call the number on the card on Monday morning. Ask for my assistant, Patricia. Tell her I asked you to call about the program. She'll set up a meeting. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a simple white business card. Sophie took it, her hand shaking slightly. David Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Mitchell Technologies. There was a phone number and an email address. It looked official and professional, and holding it made everything suddenly feel very real. I can't promise anything specific without going through proper channels, David continued. We have HR protocols and processes, but I can promise you a fair chance, an interview, an opportunity. What you do with that opportunity is up to you. Sophie stared at the card, then looked up at David. Why are you doing this? And don't say it's because someone helped your mom. I mean, really, why me? David smiled, and there was something sad and knowing in his expression. You want the honest truth? Because I see my mother in you, same age she was when I was a baby. Same determination in your eyes even when everything feels impossible. Same love for your child that overcomes everything else. He paused. And because I'm in a position to help, and I believe that's not an accident. When you have the power to change someone's life for the better and you choose not to, that says something about who you are. I want to be the kind of person who helps. Sophie felt tears rolling down her cheeks again, but these were different from the tears in the grocery store. These weren't tears of humiliation or despair. These were tears of relief, of hope, of the overwhelming feeling that maybe, just maybe, things might actually be okay. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. David got out of the car and came around to open her door, then went to the trunk to get the groceries. Sophie climbed out carefully with Lily, who had fallen asleep again, the elephant tucked under her arm. David carried all the bags to the building entrance. Do you need help getting these upstairs? He asked. Sophie shook her head. I can manage. I'm on the 2nd floor. I'll make 2 trips. Are you sure? I'm sure. You've already done so much. David nodded and handed her the bags, making sure she had a good grip before letting go. Take care of yourself and that beautiful baby. And please call on Monday. I mean that. I will, Sophie promised. I really will. She watched as David walked back to his car, got in, and drove away with a small wave. Then she looked down at the business card still clutched in her hand, at the bags of groceries that would get her through more than just a few days, at Lily sleeping peacefully with her new elephant. For the first time in a very long time, Sophie felt like she could breathe, like maybe drowning wasn't inevitable, like maybe she could actually survive this, could give Lily the life she deserved. She made her way into the building and up the stairs to her apartment, managing both the baby and the groceries through sheer determination. Once inside, she laid Lily down in her crib, still holding the elephant. Then she put away the groceries, marveling at how full her small refrigerator looked. Chicken, cheese, juice, vegetables, real food. That night, after Lily was fed and sleeping soundly, Sophie sat on her sagging couch and looked at David's business card for a long time. She thought about all the times she'd felt invisible, like her struggles didn't matter to anyone. She thought about the cruel woman in the grocery store who thought she shouldn't have children. She thought about all the people who'd looked at her with judgment or pity or indifference. And then she thought about David, who'd looked at her and seen potential, who'd looked at her and seen someone worth helping, who'd looked at her and seen his own mother's story, and chose to write a different ending. Sophie set the card on her small kitchen table where she'd see it first thing in the morning. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in months she slept without nightmares. Monday morning came faster than Sophie expected. She woke up before her alarm, which was unusual. Usually she was so exhausted that she slept through the first 2 alarms and barely dragged herself out of bed for the third. But today was different. Today she'd actually slept well, and she woke up with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Nervous energy, the kind that came with possibility. Lily was still sleeping in her crib, making those soft breathing sounds that Sophie loved. The elephant was tucked next to her, and Sophie smiled at the sight. She had exactly 2 hours before she needed to make the phone call. 2 hours to get herself and Lily fed, dressed, and ready. 2 hours to practice what she was going to say. She'd spent most of Sunday thinking about it, rehearsing different versions of the conversation in her head. How do you call a CEO's office and not sound completely desperate? How do you sound professional when you haven't had a professional job in years? How do you convince someone that you're worth taking a chance on? Sophie made herself a simple breakfast with the groceries David had bought. Scrambled eggs and toast. Real food. Not just instant noodles or the last stale crackers from the back of the cupboard. As she ate, she kept looking at the business card propped up against the salt shaker. David Chen, Chief Executive Officer. The word still seemed surreal. Part of her kept waiting for this to be some kind of cruel joke. Maybe she'd call and they'd laugh at her. Maybe the number wouldn't even work. Maybe David had second thoughts over the weekend and told his assistant to screen her out. All the years of disappointment and rejection had trained her to expect the worst. But another part of her, a part she thought had died somewhere along the way, was whispering something different. Maybe this is real. Maybe good things can still happen. Maybe you deserve a chance. Lily woke up around 7 and Sophie went through their morning routine. Diaper change, bottle feeding, some tummy time on the blanket while Sophie got dressed. She didn't have much in the way of professional clothes. Most of her wardrobe consisted of her diner uniform and old jeans and t-shirts. But she found a plain blue blouse that wasn't too wrinkled and a pair of black pants that still fit reasonably well. She even put on a little makeup, something she hadn't bothered with in months. Looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, Sophie barely recognized the person staring back. She looked tired, that was undeniable. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights. But there was something else in her expression too, a spark. A hint of the person she used to be before life got so hard. At 8:45, Sophie picked up her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She dialed the number on the card, then hung up before it could ring. Took a deep breath. Dialed again. This time she let it ring. Mitchell Technologies, how may I direct your call? The receptionist's voice was professional and crisp. Sophie's mouth went dry. Hi, I'm calling for Patricia, David Chen's assistant. He asked me to call about the apprenticeship program. One moment, please. The hold music was some kind of classical piece that Sophie didn't recognize. She paced around her small living room, bouncing slightly to keep Lily content in her arms. What if Patricia didn't know anything about this? What if David forgot to tell her? This is Patricia. The voice was warm and businesslike at the same time. How can I help you? Hi, my name is Sophie Bennett. David Chen told me to call. He said to ask about the apprenticeship program. The words tumbled out too fast, but at least they were out. There was a brief pause. Sophie Bennett, Patricia repeated, and Sophie could hear the sound of typing. Ah yes, Mr. Chen left me a note about you. He said you'd be calling this morning. Relief flooded through Sophie so intensely she had to sit down. He did? He certainly did. He was quite insistent that I make time to meet with you as soon as possible. More typing sounds. Let me check his calendar. Would you be able to come in this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? This afternoon. That was only 5 hours away. Sophie's mind raced. She'd need to figure out what to do with Lily. Her friend Rachel usually couldn't babysit on weekdays because she worked, but maybe she could make an exception. Or maybe Mrs. Park from downstairs, the elderly Korean woman who sometimes smiled at Lily in the hallway. Yes, Sophie heard herself say. 2 o'clock works. Wonderful. Do you have our address? Sophie scrambled for a pen and paper, balancing Lily on one hip while she wrote down the address Patricia gave her. It was downtown in one of those tall glass buildings Sophie had walked past 100 times but never imagined going inside. Just come to the main reception desk and ask for me, Patricia continued. Patricia Flores. I'll come down to meet you. Oh, and Mr. Chen mentioned you have a young child. Is that correct? Yes, Sophie said hesitantly. She's 8 months old. Bring her with you, Patricia said matter-of-factly. We have a family room you can use if needed, and Mr. Chen specifically said not to worry about childcare for the interview. We'll work it out. Sophie felt tears pricking at her eyes again. She seemed to cry at everything these days. Thank you. Thank you so much. After hanging up, Sophie sat on the couch for a full minute, just processing what had happened. It was real. This was actually happening. She had an interview at a tech company this afternoon. Her, Sophie Bennett, who hadn't had a professional interview since she was 19 years old applying for a campus job. The next few hours passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Sophie called Rachel, who was thrilled to hear about the interview and offered to leave work early to come watch Lily. Sophie tried to protest, but Rachel insisted. This is important, Soph, let me help. By 1:15, Sophie was dressed in her best outfit with Lily packed up and ready to go. Rachel arrived at 1:30, full of encouraging words and optimism. You're going to do amazing. Just be yourself. Tell them your story. If this David guy believed in you, then there's something there worth believing in. Sophie took the bus downtown, arriving at the address 15 minutes early. The building was even more intimidating up close. All glass and steel, gleaming in the afternoon sun. People in business attire walked in and out, looking confident and purposeful. Sophie clutched Lily closer and walked through the revolving door, trying to look like she belonged there. The lobby was enormous, with high ceilings and modern furniture. A large reception desk sat in the center with the company logo behind it. Sophie approached nervously. I'm here to see Patricia Flores, she told the receptionist. I have a 2 o'clock appointment. The receptionist, a young man with friendly eyes, smiled at her. Name, please? Sophie Bennett. He typed something into his computer. Perfect, yes. Please have a seat and Patricia will be right down. Sophie sat in one of the sleek modern chairs, feeling completely out of place. Everyone around her looked so polished, so professional. Their shoes probably cost more than her entire month's rent. What was she doing here? What made her think she could fit into this world? Lily started to fuss, and Sophie automatically started the bouncing motion that usually calmed her down. A few people glanced over, and Sophie felt her face burn. This was a mistake. She should leave before she embarrassed herself. Sophie Bennett? Sophie looked up to see a woman in her 50s walking toward her. She was wearing a burgundy dress and had her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was kind, with smile lines around her eyes. This must be Patricia. Yes, that's me, Sophie said, standing up quickly. Patricia's face broke into a warm smile. And this must be Lily. What a sweetheart. She reached out to shake Sophie's hand, then gently touched Lily's foot, making the baby smile. Welcome to Mitchell Technologies. I'm so glad you could make it on such short notice. Thank you for seeing me. Of course. David was very clear that we needed to move quickly on this. Patricia gestured toward the elevators. Come on up. We're on the 7th floor. As they rode the elevator up, Patricia made small talk about the weather and asked about Lily's age. It was casual conversation, but Sophie appreciated it. It helped her nerves settle slightly. The 7th floor was open and bright, with glass-walled offices and cubicles arranged in clusters. People were working at computers, having quiet conversations, moving between rooms. It felt busy but not chaotic, professional but not cold. Patricia led Sophie to a conference room with a large table and comfortable chairs. Have a seat. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee? We have juice boxes if Lily wants something. Water would be great, thank you. Patricia left and returned a moment later with 2 bottles of water and a juice box. She sat down across from Sophie and pulled out a tablet. So David told me a bit about meeting you. He said you were studying to be a nurse? Sophie nodded and launched into her story. She told Patricia about her parents, about dropping out of school, about getting pregnant and being on her own. She talked about the diner job and the car breaking down. She was honest about her situation because she figured there was no point in pretending things were different than they were. Patricia listened intently, taking occasional notes on her tablet, but mostly just paying attention. When Sophie finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That takes incredible strength," Patricia said finally. "Raising a child alone while working and dealing with grief and financial stress. That's not easy." "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," Sophie admitted. "I believe it. And yet here you are, still fighting, still trying to build something better for your daughter. That says a lot about your character." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "David has good instincts about people. In the 10 years I've worked for him, I've learned to trust his judgment. If he thinks you'd be a good fit for our program, then I'm inclined to agree." Sophie's heart was pounding. "What exactly would the program involve?" Patricia pulled up something on her tablet. "We have several tracks depending on your interests and aptitudes. Given your nursing background, you have attention to detail, the ability to follow procedures, and people skills. Those translate well to several positions. We have openings in customer service, administrative support, and project coordination. All of them start at $18 an hour with full benefits kicking in after 90 days. $18 an hour. Sophie did the quick math in her head. That was more than double what she made at the diner. With benefits. With childcare assistance. It seemed impossible. "The training period is typically 3 months, Patricia continued. You'd work alongside experienced team members, learning our systems and processes. We believe in teaching people on the job, not just throwing them in and expecting them to figure it out." "And the childcare assistance?" Sophie asked quietly. "We partner with several daycare centers in the area. We subsidize the cost for employees in the apprenticeship program. You'd pay about 20% of the normal rate and we cover the rest. It's one of David's initiatives. He believes that parents, especially single parents, shouldn't have to choose between working and affording childcare." Sophie felt overwhelmed. This was more than she'd hoped for, more than she'd dreamed was possible. "There would be an official interview process," Patricia said. "HR would need to meet with you. We'd need to verify your previous work history and education, standard background check. But assuming everything checks out, and I don't see why it wouldn't, we could have you starting within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, her entire life could be different. "I know this is a lot to take in," Patricia said gently. "Why don't you take a day or two to think about it? Talk it over with anyone you need to consult. Then give me a call and let me know if you want to move forward."